Sam is known as the conscious consultant, and he has a radio show that we're going to be talking about, the Conscious Consultant Hour. I want you to know, Sam, that I told everybody earlier that I was going to reveal when I listen to your show, because I listen to it every week. I do it while I'm stripping woodwork, and it's something that takes me out of there and to another place. And I have just come to really, really love your show. And if you're not familiar with Sam, he has the Conscious Consultant Radio Hour. He is the founder of, and I can't think of the NYC, Talk NYC.
Talk Radio.
Yeah, right there, talkradio.nyc. Thank you, Sam. It's been a long day. But Sam is, he's inspiring. He goes into areas. He's not afraid of delving into something, that's new and adventurous for him, and he really embraces the new. Sam is a 3 times international bestseller, and his latest book, which I ordered, is Everyday Awakening. And if you listen to his show, he always starts off with a little passage from Everyday Awakening, and that has over time become my favorite part of the show. So Sam, I want to thank you for being here. You are someone who has been inspirational to me, and I think of you as a dear and treasured friend. So yes, thank you.
I call this podcast Success Stories, but I've actually been testing out this new title, which is From Conversations to Cash.
I like that.
All right, and this is about what's possible for you in the virtual world out there. And I use real life success stories. Now, just a little bit of my background. I mean, Dumont did a wonderful job of introducing me, but just to let everyone know, I've been an entrepreneur since '93. I've had successful businesses in half a dozen different industries, probably up to 8 by now. I'm the executive director and producer of Talking Alternative Broadcasting, which is the division of the entity that runs the network. It's been over 13 years. I've produced thousands of episodes. We now garner over 45,000 listeners monthly. We reach people from over 120 different countries. And last year we had over 300,000 listeners. And we stream actually from the station. We stream 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Now, we're not live 365, but when we're not live, we're rebroadcasting shows from the last 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. So this way, if you've missed a show, if you happen to hit the stream during one of the off hours, you'll catch an episode that maybe you missed from a couple of weeks ago.
That's great. We were talking about that last time we were talking about how reruns came about. I hadn't known about that. So.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting because although your live audience, and we do things live first and we record it while it's live, and then we put the recording out afterwards as the podcast, and your live audience is always going to be your smallest percentage of your audience because most people are going to download and listen afterwards. However, your live audience are your most loyal and engaged audience.
Yeah.
So I always ask people, what do you think the number one challenge is with having a successful podcast, right? And most people will say money, time, knowing my marketing, distribution, creating great content, getting great guests. And the funny thing is, it's actually none of these. All these reasons that people say why they can't do a podcast, they're actually not the thing that's truly holding them back. And this is the thing that I find so incredible, that people don't realize that, if you don't have a lot of money, there are ways of doing things inexpensively. If you don't have a lot of time, then you work with a network, someone like myself, who provides a done-for-you service so that you don't have to put a lot of time into it. When it comes to knowledge, look, you're expert in something. I mean, whatever you're passionate about, whatever you're thinking you might want to do a podcast in, you know about your stuff. right? And when it comes to marketing, I mean, Dumont is an incredible marketing person when it comes to LinkedIn. You work with someone like Dumont, or you get a good marketing person. I mean, we market all of our shows on our network through our social media channels. I mean, distribution, there are all kinds of ways of getting distribution. I mean, we provide that for our hosts as part of what we do. But even if, let's say, you're trying to do it yourself, you can find ways to get it out there. You just have to do a little research. Creating great content, well, you know, again, that goes back to being knowledgeable and your expertise. But creating great content is really about always keeping the audience in mind. If you're always asking yourself, is what I'm saying interesting to my audience? Does it serve my audience? Is it valuable? If you always ask yourself those questions, you'll be creating great content. And in terms of getting great guests, people don't realize it's actually not that difficult to get great guests. I mean, they may not necessarily be well-known guests, but lots of people who are up and coming, or if they've written a book, or they're trying to be a thought leader in their industry, they're more than happy to come on a podcast. They love to talk about what they do. So all of these excuses, they actually are not what keeps someone from having a successful podcast. And just to like prove the point, there was this New York Times article a couple of years ago called "Have We Hit Peak Podcasts?" Keep in mind, this is before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So at the time, there were over 700,000 podcasts.
Wow.
Now, I mean, 1 million is like a year or two ago. It's probably closer to 1.5 million right now. However, what the New York Times article did was when they looked at the podcasts out there, they found that between March and May of 2019, less than 19% of them came out with a new episode. Less than 19%. So out of those 700,000, like less than 20%, less than a fifth of those were actually active podcasts. And today there's a lot more podcasts, but you know what? That number of how many are active has shrunk even more. And the average, this blew me away when I found this out, the average podcast only has 8 or less episodes.
Wow.
8 or less. To me, that's nuts, because it means that they put some time into it, they get set up and doing stuff, and then they're like, it's not doing anything for me, I'm going to leave it. I mean, if you write 8 blog posts, you're not going to get 1,000 subscribers.
No.
If you do 8 of anything, you're not going to see any success. So the biggest challenge, as always, is being consistent.
Yeah.
Like, that's what takes to have a successful podcast. You got to keep at it. I mean, I've been doing my show now for over 13 years.
Wow.
I have over 750 episodes. They're not all up on the podcasting platforms, because the first few years I didn't, and then I started uploading them, and it was just too much to go back to the library. But I have over 400, I think, in the library.
Wow.
And I now get like easily 5,000 to 6,000 listeners, viewers on any individual episode over a course of a couple of months.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. You know, people think, oh, I have to have millions of followers to have a successful podcast. No, look, there's only one Joe Rogan. There's only one Alex Jones. You know, these people who make it really big and everyone hears about them, they're unique individuals. They're less than 1/100th of 1% of the shows out there. But the thing is, you don't have to be them. You don't have to have, you know, those people, like, their whole business, their whole life is their show. I mean, you know, Joe Rogan, he goes for 3 hours straight. Alex Jones used to do 8 hours at a time. I mean, these guys, that was like all they did. You don't have to do that. You just have to be smart about it and use your show in a way that will really build your brand and your business. And I have sort of 3 success stories, 3 different shows that kind of show you how you can have different types of success depending on what kind of show you want to do and why you get into it. Because you don't have to get into it purely to, like, you know, get your next client. There are a lot of other ways of doing it. And so here are my 3 case studies. So the first one, and my favorite one, is really Tony Martignetti. Because when Tony came to me, he's a nonprofit consultant. He does 2 things for nonprofits. He does charity registration and planned giving, and that's it. But he really wanted to serve his industry, and so he really picked a very specific niche. He did his show for small and mid-sized nonprofits. Not for the big players, because he saw like the big nonprofits have plenty of money and budgets to hire consultants, to hire service providers who can do all this stuff for them. But he saw how the small and mid-sized nonprofits really struggled with a lot of different aspects of running a nonprofit. So he started doing his show, and he was really, he wasn't doing it for so much the sake of increasing his business or becoming a thought leader in his industry. He did it because he really wanted to serve his niche. However, what happened, because he was so passionate about serving his niche, he brought on amazing thought leaders onto his show. He started doing all the right things, going to charity conferences, nonprofit conferences, and interviewing the speakers in his booth. And organizing things with the conference organizers to be able to promote the conference by interviewing the speakers and then putting out all these interviews during the year on his show. What happened over time, he started getting mentioned in some nonprofit industry blogs as like, oh, Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio, a great resource for your small and mid-sized nonprofit. Oh, Tony Martignetti, he's someone you want to listen to and pay attention to. He knows a lot about nonprofits. Why did they say he knew so much about nonprofits? Because he would have these reoccurring guests that he'd have on maybe once a month who would talk about different aspects of nonprofits. Technology, social media, prospect research, board governance, anything that related to running a nonprofit. And he'd have them back over and over again. So what happened over time, people started contacting him and saying, hey, Tony, I need a marketing plan for my nonprofit. Can you do that for me? No, I'm sorry, I don't do that, but let me refer you to someone who does. Hey, Tony, I need a prospect research plan for my nonprofit. Can you help me with that? No, sorry, I don't do that. Hey, Tony, I need a planned giving. I want to put planned giving into part of our strategy. Oh, yeah, that I can help you with. But what he was doing is he built this whole consortium of aligned professionals around him. So even if someone contacted him for something that he didn't do, he would refer them to one of his close partners. And of course, they had some arrangement between them to make it equitable. So
yeah, and that is so valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's what I call the halo effect. It's like by having these amazing thought leaders and these great people come on your show, people think you're the expert about everything. So that's why I say you don't have to be knowledgeable, you just have to know who is.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And because he was so passionate about it, he eventually became the #1 nonprofit podcast on iTunes. And not only was he #1, he had more than double the number of subscribers that the #2 podcast had.
Wow.
Yeah, Tony was really good, worked with me for over 10 years. He retired eventually. He's now down in North Carolina. So that's #1. So you see, we can get these benefits becoming a thought leader. I mean, one of the nonprofit industry blogs said he was one of their top 10 list of thought leaders in the nonprofit space. And they said, and if you like the other top 9 thought leaders we have, they've all been guests on Tony's show. Now another person who did very well with his podcast, but totally different intention behind his podcast. This gentleman by the name of Michael Dolce. I met Michael through a business networking group. And I knew Michael as the tech guy of the group. Like he did websites, search engine optimization, search engine marketing, that kind of stuff. And one day he comes up to me after the meeting, he says, Sam, I want to do a show on your network. And I'm like, okay, Michael, sure. What do you want to do a show on, technology? And he goes, no, that's just my day business. He's like, I actually want to do a show on comic books and pop culture because I'm a comic book artist and I used to work in the industry 14 years ago, But then I got married and had a kid and had bills to pay, so I couldn't make much money at comic books. So then I got into technology, and that's how I make my money. But now with all the successful comic book movies from Marvel and DC and all the TV shows, I think there's a real opportunity for me to pitch ideas and do a lot more in the comic book space. So I want to reinvigorate my comic book industry contacts and have it build up that side of what I do.
Wow, that's great.
So he started doing his show with me, a very fun show. But you know, I have to admit, it cost me a lot of money because he would always talk about like the latest comic book movie that would come out, and his show was on Wednesdays. So I had to see it like opening weekend before he did his show, so they didn't ruin it for me when I heard him review the movie. And I love that kind of stuff. So I was always.
Oh, I do too. That's great. Well, that's really inspirational too, that someone was able to take a passion that wasn't part of their business life.
Right.
And take that and take it in a different direction. He'd probably been like, yeah, I mean, you don't get into comics and movies and pop culture when you're in your 50s. You get into it when you're young.
Right.
You know? So going back and seeing that Marvel movie.
Yes. And so what happened was he worked with me for about 3 years. And because he brought on all these within the comic book industry well-known figures, but most people don't know their names. He got on people from Marvel, from DC, comic book creators, production houses, smaller ones. He started making these connections. He would say to people, oh, you know, if you could ever introduce me to, I'm looking to pitch ideas. And people started introducing him, and he started being able to pitch more ideas and starting doing more comic book work. And then eventually what happened is he was able to sell his podcast to an entertainment company who loved his show, renamed it, rebranded it, and now he gets paid to do his podcast. And not only that, but when he did that, I saw him about a year later, and I was like, because, you know, once he did that, he moved it over and everything. And I saw him about a year later, and I was like, so Michael, how's things going? And he goes, Sam, I have to tell you, more than 50% of my income now comes from my comic book side of my business, not my tech business. It's built up so much. I'm doing so well. And that's exactly what he wanted. Right? So he, you know, so it wasn't about getting another website client. It was about, you know, building up his passion to make it something that would that could help to support at least that it was at least 50% of what he was doing. So that was his dream and his intention. So it doesn't always have to be so straightforward. And again, he didn't have like tens of thousands of viewers. He had, you know, a couple of thousand viewers, but like comic book fans are rabid fans. They love this stuff. So they were tuning in every week, but not just fans, but like fellow artists and fellow people from the industry.
Sure. Wow.
So
it's a great story.
So that's why I really try and open up people's minds that like doing a show, there's so many different ways about doing it to find success, which brings me to my last case study, Follow Me Friday with Joan and Priya. Now, this one's really interesting because this show did not start off as Follow Me Friday.
Oh.
It actually started off as 21st Century Entrepreneur with this gentleman by the name of JC, who I also knew from a networking group. And JC, after he did a couple of episodes, he's like, I need to bring on a co-host because it was just a little too dry. Because he has a legal background and he's a businessman. He was kind of dry. So he brings on Joan with him, who's a lively, bubbly woman. You know, I've known her for a long time, and she does social media for people. And so she co-hosted it with him for about a year. But then he got a kid. He got a big client who was up in Connecticut, and he couldn't come into the studio anymore and do the show on Fridays when the show was scheduled. So he was like, I love doing the show, but I just don't have the time anymore. He turned it over to Joan. So then Joan was doing it, and although she's a female entrepreneur and she was starting to bring on female entrepreneurs, she was like, this 21st century, it doesn't feel right for me. I want to rebrand it. So then she changed it because she's a social media person to Follow Me Friday, you know, like Taco Tuesdays, Follow Me Friday.
Yeah.
And then she did the same thing that JC did. She's like, I don't want to do this all on my own. And her friend Priya, who does video stuff, came on with her. And then it kind of changed. I mean, they did highlight female entrepreneurs, But then they really started turning it into like a Kathy Lee and Hoda kind of daily show. And they would, and they really started to have fun, and they were enjoying it, and people liked it. And then they had a guest come on, who's a female entrepreneur who had a wine company. And so she brought a bottle of wine for them as a guest, and they opened up the bottle of wine on air, and we'd do video at the time. They had a couple of nice glasses. They actually, then someone else made glasses with their names on it. They open the bottle of wine, they take a sip, they drink the wine, because it was like the last show on Friday afternoons, and they'd like to start off the weekend, so they had fun with it. Then
following Friday.
Right. But then what happened is somebody else saw that and was like, "Hey, can I sponsor your show? I'm a wine store in the neighborhood, and I would love to get some promotion on your show." And they're like, "Yeah, sure." So then they got this wine store as a sponsor, and the wine store would give them wine every week, and they would open up and they would talk about the wine. And then through all these connections, they started meeting more and more people in the wine industry, and they started getting business from the wine industry. And then this wine distributor, this guy, and he wrote a book about wine, and he came on and then he sponsored the show also around wine. The show wasn't about wine, but it was just they enjoyed wine. It was part of it. Me, I always drink tea on my show, so I'm trying to get a tea sponsor.
Yeah.
But again, it's like when you're open and you don't keep things so like locked in that like success for me needs to look like this. I mean, you have an intention behind it. Mm-hmm. But they were able to get into like a whole new aspect of business, and they were able to like open it up and make money, not necessarily directly from the show. I mean, it helped the sponsorships helped to pay for the fees, but they got a lot of free wine from it.
Yeah.
But they made money because they got other business through the people they brought on the show. And this is the thing that people often forget, that like bringing somebody, like interviewing someone on your show is a great way to get your foot in the door and start to build the relationship with someone that could eventually lead to a joint venture, new business, a new project, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So
go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to say, so those are my 3 case studies. And I hope like people get the idea that like success with a podcast, it doesn't have to involve millions of listeners, and it doesn't have to look one way. It can look many, many different ways.
Okay. So Sam, I'm going to ask the dumb questions here. Okay.
No dumb questions.
Okay, great. I love that.
There are no dumb questions, I should say.
Yeah. Excuse me. If someone is considering doing a podcast, hold on, just stop.
Bless you.
Yeah, that was a.
Whoa.
Well, I guess that's it. Anyway, if someone is considering doing a podcast, and we've talked a lot about the different ways and different kinds of digital marketing today. And I'm wondering, if someone is considering doing a podcast, what kinds of questions should they ask themselves?
So actually that leads me into a slide I'll have in a moment. So just to have a successful podcast, there are a couple of things. Know your goal, your end result, because otherwise you don't know what success looks like for you. Keep at it. Consistency is key. Reuse, republish, and repurpose. However, this is one of the things people need to think about. First and foremost, is it a DIY project or a DFY project? Are you going to do it yourself, or do you want a done-for-you solution? Mm-hmm. Okay? And what does that mean when it comes to podcasting? So, well, obviously, doing it by yourself is a DIY. It means you're going to figure everything out. You're going to figure the technology, the editing, the music, and copyright, all that stuff. A done-for-you solution is like what I provide, which is a station or a network where they provide the service and handle the technology and handle all the stuff for you, and you pay them for that service. So now, obviously, if you do it yourself, it's going to take less money, but it's going to take a lot more of your time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I feel like as entrepreneurs, we really have to be mindful of is what's more valuable to us in the moment. Because sometimes we tend to think our time isn't very valuable, so it's okay to spend a lot of time doing busy work. But the truth is, if you're spending, 3, 4, 5 hours trying to figure out the technology for your podcast, how many clients could you have spoken to? How many product ideas could you have come up with? How much other stuff could you have made money with that time instead of spending that money on things? And also, if you're going to do it yourself, you really got to like technical details, because there's a lot of little technical details on doing podcasts. And if something is just slightly off, it can totally ruin the podcast. So you really need to be technically inclined. Now, with a done-for-you solution, it costs you more money, but it takes a lot less of your time. And so that's something you really have to weigh is, what is your time worth? And so when you're like looking for a solution and you see you want, first of all, a quality solution because it represents your brand. You want someone who's aligned with your values, and you want someone who you can feel good about, like who can show you their track record, and someone who's going to give you analytics so you know how you're doing each month.
Oh, yeah.
And also, one of the things I feel so important is that when you use a done-for-you solution, like with our network, our hosts, they show up, they do their hour show each week, and they go about their day, and we handle the rest. Then they get to focus on their genius, right? It's like, do what you know best. Focus on that, and outsource the rest to people who their genius is what they do. And this way, you can build on other people's. This is why you were sneezing. This furball over here, whoops, is trying to get on my lap.
Are you allergic? Are you allergic?
I'm not allergic, but I'm totally covered with cat hair right now.
Oh.
No, but you were sneezing
we
before.
lost our kitty a couple of weeks ago, but I'm still finding things with cat hair everywhere. It doesn't go away. She'll be with me for years.
Yes, I'm sure. I mean, I'm just house sitting. I'm just taking care of the cat and the dog for a friend up here in the mountains of Colorado. But it's like they like totally have adopted me. And so the last point is that when you use a done-for-you solution, you build your success on other people's expertise and experience. So then there are a lot less challenges, a lot less issues, a lot less things that you really need to worry about. So these are kind of some of the considerations I feel people, when they're starting something, they should keep in mind.
Yeah. I think that just speaking on my own, the technical details would be overwhelming. Getting started, because there's so many decisions to make. Right. And also the distribution, that would be something that would be a total mystery to me. And that I think is that's the advantage of coming to someone with your expertise.
Exactly. And it's not just a distribution, but it's also the analytics. Like, do people know, like, how do they find out how many people are listening on the different platforms? I mean, we have an audio server we get a log file from. We get from our website. We get from the podcasting platforms. We get from all the different social media platforms that we stream out, because we simulcast the video everywhere on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Twitch TV. And so we download the statistics file once a month. We take all of those log files, statistics files, put them all together, sort them and subtotal them by show, and then break them out and then send them to the host. So each month by month, the hosts get to see how many people are actually listening to their show. So, some networks will say, oh, we've got 300,000 listeners. We got 1 million listeners. But they never actually give you the numbers to see, like, where do those things come from? So when I say 45,000 listeners a month, we're not a tiny station. We're not a huge station. We're in between. We're a mid-range station. I know that number is solid, and I can prove I have those numbers. I can prove I had over 300,000 listeners to the station last year. It's not a empty promise.
Yeah, and I think that would be very important to a lot of people, who want those analytics. It would also seem to me that the analytics could tell you how certain topics are playing,
Exactly.
So I think that would be valuable feedback.
Absolutely. So you want to see, like, are certain shows getting more views, getting more listens than other shows? And then you look at, well, was it the title of the show? Was it the guest? Like, was the guest really good at sharing it on their social media? Was it the topic? Was it the time of year? You look at it, and if you just pay attention, you really get a lot of insight from the analytics.
I'm sure, yeah. That's something I pore over all the time. And we've been talking about that today in terms of, you have to have feedback on what you're doing. And there are a number of ways to get that feedback. One of them is with the analytics. It's hard to argue with cold, hard facts or graphs that you see.
Right. Exactly. And the analytics will also show you why consistency is key. Because whenever I have a host that something comes up and they can't do a show, and we end up running a rerun, the numbers drop. And not just for that episode, for following episodes as well. And then it takes a little time for it to build back up to where it was before. So this is why consistency is so important. It's like, if you know you're not going to be able to do a show during a certain time, maybe you're going to be on vacation or you're going to be away at a workshop or whatever it is, pre-record and get those shows in the can and get them ready to release, so there's something new each and every week.
That's a great idea.
Because if you don't, people stop listening. You lose their attention. They're on to the next thing.
Okay. Well, that makes sense to me, because we're all creatures of habit. Right. And if I know that your podcast comes out on a certain day, then I can, or your live stream comes out on a certain day, then I can make sure I'm watching it. And I've listened enough to know that you have viewers that are contributing and giving you feedback while you're doing it.
Like, I do my show on talkradio.nyc every Thursday, noon Eastern time to 1 p.m. And that's when it streams out on YouTube and Facebook on all our channels. So I have loyal listeners who are tuning in every single week, and they check in, and they're the ones who will comment on the topic of the show, and they'll give me questions, and I always read them off, and I always interject in the conversation what they're saying, because that builds loyalty and engagement.
Absolutely. And it rewards them for being there and for contributing and making
Exactly. And like I said, those are the most loyal fans you have. So when I launched my book back in 2020, Everyday Awakening, like, those loyal fans, they were the first ones buying the book. And not only were the first ones buying the book, they bought several copies and they gave it to, like, friends and family as a present.
Wow, that's great. That's terrific. Yeah, and I did order it, like I said, and I can't wait to start reading it. One of my favorite parts of your show is at the beginning when you read from that, because it's always a life lesson.
Yes.
It's always a life lesson, and it's always very clear to me that you have really thought about this. You're questioning it, and you also involve your journey. You tell us, you give us a peek into your journey and what it's been like. I always appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's also a way to kind of highlight every week and remind people of the book. So this way, and so I always say, hey, and if you like this is where you can get my book, and so it helps to keep it fresh. So it's like every month I'm getting a few more sales. Every month, people are finding out about my book.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really appreciate about that, Sam, is, number one, I love hearing the story. You always, there's a lesson, and you're telling the story within the context of your own life, but there's always something there to really think about, to really grab onto. And one of the things that I always hear when you're reading from your book or talking is these aren't, this book isn't separate from Sam. You didn't just come over here and say, well, what would people like to hear about, and do that. it's more of a reminder, or it is to me, to pay attention to what's going on in our lives,
Right.
and all the clues and the messages we get.
And this is kind of also a benefit for the listeners of the show, is because when I read the section, then I talk about it, and I often talk about where did it come from? Why did
Yes.
I happen to say this? And I add more context and more background to it. And the funny thing is, I just started doing this at some point, last year or the year before, and I'm just going one by one through the book. Yet somehow, whatever that little section is of talking about that week is always so apropos for the guests that I have. And the guests
Absolutely.
almost inevitably say, and we'll refer back to it later in the show, and it's like, oh, just like in the quote you read earlier, blah, blah, blah. So there's really a magic in doing that. And so to me, it's a real lesson of when you follow your heart, when you follow what's authentic for you, when you follow your spirit, like amazing synergies will happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I always hear that, I always hear that when you're talking, and when you're talking about, whatever the chapter is. I've noticed that for me, it's always kind of a moment to say, okay, how can I develop more in that area? It's how can I take this and apply this to me? Because almost always it's a life lesson, but it's a life lesson we all face.
Right.
It's something that we all encounter. And I think what I hear from your station or from your show more than anything is that, you say it's the conscious consultant. That's how I feel about it. I feel like I have this consultant who comes into my room and says, have you thought about this today? And you always start off with just that little lesson from your book. And it always seems to be exactly what I needed to hear then.
Wonderful. It's so good to hear. Thank you, Dumont.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a loyal fan, let me tell you. I'm going to remove, are you finished with the slides? Or
yes, I'm finished with the slides.
Okay, I'm going to remove that so we can just chat. But, for those.
But the other thing too is I also want to, it's also a lesson for people to learn for their own show. Like if you're doing an interview style show, but you want to make sure that you have your own voice within it, that you're not just asking questions, but that people get a sense of you during it. So this is the way I do it during my show. So the first 5-10 minutes, it's me reading the section, talking about it. So then people get to know me, and then I bring on my guest. And then the whole rest of the show, it's all about the guest. I make them look like a superstar. Sure. People love it. But then this way, it balances out. So the show that I have an opportunity to share my own voice during my show, as well as then bringing guests who are amazing and talking about all different things.
We, before you came on, Rich, and I'm going to mangle Rich's last name now. Hold on. Rich, I apologize. Hold on just a second. Yes, Bontrager, or it's Bontrager. And he talks about building your brand through social media and building it through all the different medias that you can. And so one of the things he was talking about, and I loved this, and what you just said reminded me of it. He started talking about growing up. He's from the same age or general age area that I am, and seeing Disney on every, what was it, the World of Disney or whatever it was, every Sunday night.
Every Sunday night, 7 p.m., right after Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom.
And right before Bonanza.
And right before Bonanza, right.
I remember this because he talked about how Walt would come on himself, and he always introduced the show. and that it was all Walt and Mickey. You know, you are not going to split those two up. And I even remember him talking to Mickey. You know, like Mickey would be there talking, you know, but there was that relationship you had because Disney seemed so comfortable in his skin, and he was this essentially likable, you know, guy who came on. You know, you kind of reacted to him like he was your Uncle Walt.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of that feeling. You know, he was a guest in your home. You know, he came into your home, and I think my parents loved that he always seemed to have a moral to the story. You know.
Yeah.
You know, but that whole building your brand and being authentic to who you are, and he was so authentic in his presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
You knew who this man was, and that's what I flashed to when you were talking about bringing in that part of you into it, you know, and really branding it with who you are.
And here's the thing. It's like these days, people smell authenticity 10 miles away.
Yes.
So if you're not being authentic, people will turn you off right away. So how do you be authentic? You talk about what's real, what's really going on in your business, in your life, in whatever it is that you're talking about. You know, oftentimes I coach my hosts on the network that you know, to bring on maybe some client they've worked with and have the client talk about their journey and their struggle of like, where were they before they started working with them? What changed? How did they struggle through it? What was their struggle? And then where are they now? And then that way, even if it's not your authentic story, it can be someone else's authentic story.
Absolutely. So getting into that conversation and bringing, you know, and opening up the network to other people too, can be, you know, can really work. And I think what I heard from you and what I heard from Rich earlier is that authenticity is so central to it. And when I talk to people about branding, one of the things I say is people recognize authenticity. It's so rare these days, you know, that we go, oh my gosh, this is something I haven't seen in a while.
Right.
And it really makes it, it really helps us to learn to invest in that individual. Right. You know, I listen to you. You come into my home every week and you teach me these wonderful lessons. So if somebody asks me about you, I'm going to say, oh, you have to tune in right away. You're not going to believe this. And I would also be able to relate a little bit of your story.
Right. Because
I know that your story had some twists and turns on the way. But yeah, there's a kitty cat, huh?
Yeah.
So, you know, I always feel like you are inviting me in a little bit. When you do your show, I always feel that I have caught a brief glimpse into your life and what's important to you.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the way I wrote the book. That's kind of the way I am. That's just me.
Cat's determined.
Yeah, this cat really wants to get into the show. He's a ham. But also I want to mention that, like, being authentic does not necessarily have to be about all the pain you went through and all the problems you went through. Sometimes being authentic is talking about what are you trying to do that scares you? You know, what is the change you're trying to make? What is the way you would like to see things that it's not being? You know, that can be authentic as well.
Yeah, and I think I'm looking at is that an orange tabby?
Yes, it is.
They're my favorite cats.
It's a very cute orange tabby.
Yeah, in fact, my very first pet was an orange tabby.
Yeah. And
my parents have pictures of me with my arms wrapped around, and you see in the progressive pictures this cat's just slipping. You know, finally I have my arms around his head. But yeah, and I think that's an important point, Sam, that we don't always have to bare our souls about tragedy.
Right.
that we all have things that we go through in our lives. One piece of my story is I had to close my first business.
Mm-hmm.
I from a branding point of view, calling something Career Windows was not really smart, because Windows into Google and you get 40 pages of Microsoft.
There you go.
So I had a few things to learn, But what you have done and the journey that you have taken to get here, I think is one of the reasons that your show is so powerful. Because when I listen, you give me a glimpse into your life. And it's not always, a glimpse into, this horrible thing was going on. Usually it's just a glimpse into something that has occurred to you over time.
Mm-hmm.
Something that you've learned to, something, as you're reading it, you'll say, this, I'm not sure what was going on at this time, or this was during a time of such and such. And then you talk about, that one particular piece. And to me, that is in many ways the most valuable part of the podcast, because that's where I'm listening to you and I'm hearing what's important to you about it. And then when you introduce that guest, it always seems related. What you were saying, it just always seems to be just right.
And the other thing I want the people listening to know is that before I took over the station 13 years ago and started doing my own show as well as running the network, I had no background in broadcasting. I had no idea what I was doing. I had a background in public speaking, I had a background in technology, but I had no idea what did it take to run an internet radio station. I had no idea what to do with podcasting. I had no idea any of this stuff. But I just said okay to what the universe put in front of me, and I just learned along the way. So sometimes life presents us with something that calls us to step into a greater part of ourselves, that calls us to try something new, something different, that maybe we don't know that much about.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We don't have to have all the answers. We just have to be willing to ask the questions and ask for help.
Yeah.
So I mean, what I do today, it looks very polished. It looks really great. Believe me, if you listen to my first couple of episodes, they were awful. They were awful. They were the worst episodes. But I just stuck with it, and I just kept going, and I kept listening, and I kept learning. So, if you want to have a successful podcast, just stick with it. Keep learning, keep investigating, keep finding professionals who can support you in your journey. And eventually you'll find a way to make your show successful. And, some people do a show as a social media strategy. They do their show each week because they want to reach out to their mailing list without trying to sell them on anything. Like I said, some people do it as a way of connecting with potential partners and potential people to work with. Some people do it as purely content development. They have ideas in their head, and maybe they're not so good at typing and writing things, but they're better at speaking it. So they speak it, and then they get all the transcripts, and then they make a book from it. I mean, there's so many ways that you can use a podcast to really help your brand and your business. That, to me, it's never an expense. It's always an investment, and it's an investment that will pay off over time.
And your whole point about being consistent with it, I think, is so important, because I can speak for myself. I know that there are times when the newsletter doesn't go out when I had planned to send it out, and we tend to kind of brush that off, but it doesn't take long for people to get out of the habit of paying attention to you,
right?
And that can be kind of scary. But there was one thing you said that I wanted to explore just a little bit more, and that was that you didn't know anything about podcasting. You knew about technology to a certain extent. You had technical abilities, but this, and this opportunity kind of presented itself in a way that you weren't ready for. When you were going to help him sell the business, and you ended up buying it. And so I'm wondering, what was it that you had internally, or that you had internalized, that enabled you to take this step? Because that's a pretty big step.
Well, my previous venture was in real estate. I did real estate development, and I got killed in the 2008, financial crunch. I literally lost my shirt. I lost everything I put into it. So I was kind of looking for my next thing. I said, I'm not built for real estate. I can't do this again. And when I met him, I met him, and a week later I was in his office, and we were having this long meeting, and he was an acupuncturist, right? So he was selling both his acupuncture practice and the radio station.
Okay.
Now, I don't know anything about acupuncture, so I was just asking him these questions. I wanted to know the good, the bad, the ugly. If I'm going to help find somebody to buy your business, I need to know. So he's telling me all about this grandmaster he studied under, and this particular form of acupuncture, and how effective it was, and Now his, practice is really thriving now. And I was like, okay, but I wasn't that interested in it because I'm not an acupuncturist. I don't know anything about acupuncture. And then he started talking about the radio station. And that I got really interested in because I saw the potential for the business model. I saw the potential because, again, I do have a background in technology. I understand technology, and I love to talk. So it was a nice hybrid. So I kind of very jokingly, it was purely jokingly, by the end of this 2.5-hour meeting, I said to him, if I can't find someone to buy your business, I'll just buy it myself. We both laughed at it because I don't know anything about acupuncture. I go home that night and I tell my wife all about it. She asks me a few questions. She looks at me, stone cold, no expression, and says, forget helping him to sell his business. I'm like, really? And I was kind of crestfallen because I was like, oh, I liked him. He was a nice guy. He said it would be good karma for me to help someone go into the monkhood. She said, yeah. She goes, we may not have much money after our real estate debacle, but we may as well put what little bit of money we have left into a business that's actually making money. Let's find a way to just buy it ourselves. I'm like,
wow.
Oh, what a great idea.
I never thought of that.
Yeah. So literally a few hours after I said the same thing came out of my mouth, she said the exact same thing.
Wow.
So then we were like, okay. And so we cashed in some retirement savings. We cashed in some investments. We worked out a deal with him. We brought in an acupuncturist to handle his clients. We turned his acupuncture practice into a more generalized wellness center. And then I really focused on the radio station. I got a new URL for it. I changed the website a few times. I've had on so many different hosts. I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of hosts over the years, and really built it up because it was literally like 2 or 3 hosts when I took over the network. It was nothing.
Okay.
I've had as many as 15 hosts, active hosts at a given time. And things grow and expand and contract, and it was just, when I look at where it's brought me, it's brought me to places I could not have imagined. I mean, if I'd met you 20 years ago and you said to me, Sam, in 2023, this is what you're going to be doing between the radio station and the other things I do in my life, I would have said, you're nuts. Me do that? Are you crazy? I don't know anything about that. I'm never going to do that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But one of the things I happen to be good at is just saying yes when something feels right, and life puts something in front of me.
Okay.
Sometimes it gets me in trouble.
I imagine it could.
Majority of the time, things have worked out, though.
Okay, I find this story so inspiring because not only were you thinking in that direction, but your wife and you really had a meeting of the minds there. She saw the vision just as much as you did.
Well, I think more she was thinking this will keep me out of trouble.
Oh, okay. Well, that too.
Because my wife is a psychotherapist, right? And so we ended up in the wellness center that we created from his acupuncture practice. She started her private practice.
Okay.
And then we brought in all kinds of different practitioners, everything from naturopathic doctors to people who did energy medicine and biofeedback, and and all kinds of things. But then over the years, I mean, this was over a period of 13 years, practitioners come and go. And so now over the years, we've sort of consolidated down to keep things very simple. So it's just me and my wife. We don't have any other practitioners right now. And when the pandemic hit, we both went purely virtual. And it was really kind of interesting because for years, people have been contacting me about wanting to do a show with me, but remotely. But the thing is, I was very much an in-person business. We had a studio with professional equipment, and my hosts were all local, and they all came into the studio. And then if their guest wasn't local, they would call in and we patch them in through the phone system. But the quality of the audio on the phone system was never that good.
Yeah.
So I'd always say to people, well, I can't really do that right now because it just wouldn't be a very good quality show. And then when the pandemic hit, I'd already been using Zoom for several years. I had no resistance to, like, I know a lot of people were like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Oh, I hope this is only 2 or 3 weeks. I was like, okay, this is the new reality. And I literally took a long weekend to figure out, okay, now that I brought everything home, how do I do at home what we were doing in the studio without all that fancy equipment?
Yeah.
And it took me about 4 days to test it. And I worked with my assistant who's virtual and you know, can we record? Can we get the music in, the commercials? Can we stream it out? Get the video working, the audio, everything working together. And literally Tuesday night at that time was our first show of the week.
Wow.
And we did the show remotely and it went off without a hitch.
Wow.
So literally I transformed the business from an in-person business to a virtual business over a weekend. Wow. And then my wife, her psychotherapy practice, the same thing. She couldn't see clients in person, so she found a HIPAA compliant solution, started seeing her clients via telemedicine platform. And so we've both been working pretty much 100% virtually for the last 3 years. And now it's like, and it's so great because it's opened me up. Like my newest host who just joined the network, she's in Asheville, North Carolina. Shout out to Dr. Mira Brancu, who just started the show, The Hard Skills, on Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc. And my hosts are all over the place. Like I only have like one other host who's in New York City now. So it doesn't even make sense for me to go back and get a studio because I have hosts in Connecticut, Long Island, and New Jersey, and North Carolina. And I have people in California interested, and Florida and Texas. You know, I've had people all over the place. So it's opened me up to a much larger market. If I just kept resisting that change, that shift, I wouldn't be where I am today. And now it's like the world is my oyster. I mean, I've had hosts work with me from as far away as London, England to Sydney, Australia, and all across the US. Because all you need now is a good internet connection, a decent microphone, and you're good to go.
Wow. You know, that's just so amazing that this is possible now. But I can really understand why it would have been, you know, or why it would have seemed risky to leave the studio, you know, and do that in the way that you're doing right now. But I think the whole thing with COVID opened us up to so many more ways of communicating.
Right. And that things don't have to look like they did in the past. And that, you know, we can do things differently. It's about being adaptable and flexible and not so stuck that things always have to be the way they've been.
Yeah, and that's not always easy. You know,
my turn.
Bless you. And you have become, you know, now that you've found this new way of operating, quite the digital nomad.
Yes, I mean, last summer my wife and I spent 3 months on the West Coast, and we worked the whole time. We weren't on vacation. We were house sitting for friends and keep an eye on their pets, and we'd work virtually. And now, like, I'm in Colorado for 3 weeks. I've been here about a week now, and I'll be here for the next 2 weeks, and I'll still be working the whole time I'm here.
Yeah, that's great. You know, that's something that I've actually started looking into because it opens up all these new possibilities. Right. You know, if you open yourself up to move, and I think that's maybe the common theme for the day is that, you know, first of all, in order to be authentic, we have to be our vulnerable selves. And sometimes that isn't real comfortable. There are times when we don't really want to be that vulnerable.
Right.
But that authenticity is just a strand that is run through the whole day. And I think part of that is what you were saying. We know what inauthentic looks like.
Right.
You know, we see it all the time. You know, just turn on the boob tube, you know, and you can get all kinds of that stuff.
Or even look on TikTok, look on Instagram. Whenever you see anyone and all they're doing is posting, you know, how great life is, and they're going here and there, and you're never hearing any challenges or any problems, you know it's inauthentic. You nobody's life is like that every single day, all week long.
And you know, we have a tendency to assign that authenticity to others, or to perceive them as authentic, but not necessarily being authentic ourselves at the same time. Right. And that can feel really risky.
Right. And what you said is really key. It's the feeling. You see, being authentic does not mean we have to get in all to the details. It doesn't mean we have to talk about the actual thing that happened, but being authentic is talking about how we feel about what happened, where we are in our process right now. You know, because people can tell, like, to be authentic, I right before hopping on this summit, I had to drive my wife to the airport because a family member is sick and she has to fly back to China. So I had to drive her to the airport. You know, she was supposed to be with me the whole time I'm out here. I drove her to the airport. We had changed her ticket. She's flying back to New York right now as we speak. And then tomorrow night she's got a flight to China to where her family is. And we only booked a one-way ticket. I have no idea when she's coming back. Oh, wow. And now I'm here, you know, in Colorado on top of a mountain. My closest neighbor is 5 miles away, all by myself with a cat and a dog.
With the cat and the dog, right?
And they're very friendly and they're very needy. So that's
the cat looks like he or she has developed a real fondness for you, Sam.
Well, the cat has a real fondness for food, and I think it's
well, that's another one. Cats do. Yes, you know, I can say that for a fact. You know, now, Sam, I'm not going to keep you all night because I know you're in Colorado and you've got that beautiful sunset or whatever to go down and go out and oh gosh, that just sounds wonderful. And I'm sorry to hear that your wife had to leave, because I know that makes it a little less enjoyable. But one of the things that you mentioned to me before coming on was that you have this assessment that people can do that really gives them some insight into whether this is where they want to go, right?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that. I don't know that we have a link to it, but I'm going to send the link.
I put it in the chat for you.
Oh, you did? Okay, great. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay. Sam, you're so good.
So the assessment, it's something it took me a while to develop. I mean, normally I charge people about a little less than $300, between $250 and $300, because it's a very detailed questionnaire about all the different aspects to think about. How ready are you to do a podcast? And just by answering the questions, it'll help to provide for you some self-reflection and assessment of really, like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? How strong is your commitment? You know, what do you perhaps need to learn a little bit more about? And it's really a wonderful thing for really people who are seriously considering this. And they just want to know, like, do I have all my bases covered or not?
Okay. Well, you know, that's really valuable, because, you know, all of us are looking for feedback and for other ways that we can get out there. But podcasts seem a little risky, I think, sometimes, or at least it feels a little risky to me. So why do we have the comments showing up?
Yeah, I see we have Audrey.
I'm not sure.
Oh, thanks,
I don't know
Audrey.
how to turn that off.
Oh, don't turn it off. That's wonderful.
Okay. Yeah, so, Audrey has an interesting comment there about enforcing the end of the podcast with her voice.
Right.
And speak to that. I mean, how important is that we actually bring our own voice forward, both in the beginning and the end of a podcast? How do we make ourselves real to the people who are watching us?
Well, also there are different types of structures for podcasting, okay? Not all podcasts need to be interview podcasts.
Okay.
Some podcasts, I used to have a wonderful, wonderful astrologer who was a Jungian astrologer who did a show on my network called Living Consciously. And he rarely would have guests on. But he would talk about astrology, he'd talk about what's going on that week in the sky, but he would talk about it in terms of not just the astrology, but he'd talk about the mythology behind it. He'd talk about archetypes. He was a Jungian astrologer.
Yeah.
And he gave me such a deep, rich appreciation for astrology, because when he'd talk about Mars, he wouldn't just talk about the planet, he'd talk about who was that Greek god? And what were his characteristics? What was his story? And how does that reflect in your life by the fact that Mars is doing this or that? And he'd know that for all the planets, all the archetypes. I mean, it was such a wonderful show. He unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And it really saddens me because he had so much to contribute and he was so well spoken.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, we can go back and look for those episodes.
Yes.
What was his name, Sam?
Monty Taylor.
Monty Taylor. I'm going to go back and look for those because that would be really interesting to me. I do a lot of, I track my dreams. I've been doing that since I was 7. So obviously there's an interest in you.
But I just bring that up to say that he didn't do an interview style show. I mean, occasionally, but mostly was just him. But what he was saying was so fascinating, it would keep you captivated for the whole show. Similarly, on the other end of the spectrum, I had shows where there were 3 co-hosts they did this wonderful show, I loved it, called Dudes of Disruption. There were 3 guys, one was an executive coach, 2 were life coaches. And they would do a show all about how to be better in your job, in your life. And it was back when we were in studio and we had call-ins and people used to call in and they would coach them live on the show.
So cool.
But again, they didn't really, I think once or twice they had guests, but it was just them and their audience because it was 3 of them. So when you have a co-host or you have multiple co-hosts, the show can just be you and them. The important thing is you want to always remember that don't just have a blabber cast where you're talking with your co-host about things that are personal that nobody else is interested in.
Nobody cares about.
Always make sure that what you're talking about with your co-host is relevant to your audience. Again, I talked about that earlier, but you want to always stay present to your audience.
Yeah. I having that interaction and that connection. So thank you, Sam. I so appreciate it. And go out and watch a sunset.
Yeah. I gotta go feed the cat and take the dog for a walk.
Okay. Well, see, there you go. I mean, Colorado. So listen, I want to thank you again, and I'm going to take a minute and just say goodbye to everybody. But thank you so much, Sam, for being here. And like I said, I will make sure that everybody gets that link.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Night.